My name is Matt, and welcome to episode 5 of Small Talk Tech, the podcast interview series where I look to uncover more similarities than differences in what makes people in tech tick. Natalie Spare is a former marketing professional turned data scientist after being inspired by one of her favorite video game series. In this episode, we go over working in a small business environment, her experiences as a woman in tech, and being trapped in Tibet. The next episode of Small Talk Tech starts now.
My name is Natalie Spare, obviously. I have a degree, like a 4-year degree in marketing is where I started. And so my background is coming from that sort of sphere. And what interested me most in marketing was the data analysis side and the insights that can be gleaned from looking at data about people and sort of figuring out what the best way to appeal to them is. I always really liked that element of marketing and kind of psychology behind it. And so from that, I sort of went into market research analysis as my concentration while I was completing my 4-year degree. And then it wasn't until after I had gotten an internship as a market research analyst that I realized that there's an entire field devoted to data analysis, and it's called data science. And I think that that's a more recent sort of terminology that's been used as kind of a buzzword in the last couple of years, because people have been doing data science for like decades at this point, but it's only just now being called that. But so I found out that I really love doing data analysis, and I think that the marketing background gives me a really unique sort of perspective on that because I've got the communications and presentation side of the skill set as well. And after I discovered that that's a whole career field, I started searching for jobs that were specific to that. And then I realized that there was a whole element of data science that's devoted to programming too. And I didn't know any programming at that point. And so I went ahead and just picked Python and started learning it. It's been about a year and a half since I taught myself Python, which, is not a very long time. But I've been practicing it since then, and I ended up re-enrolling in school again in a 2-year degree at a local college here for data science and programming support services with a concentration in Python. So that's where I am now, and I currently work as a data scientist at a local management consulting firm here in North Carolina. I basically do ad hoc data analysis and data visualizations for a lot of the consultants there in the different business units. And I recently was offered a position as a full-time project lead, data scientist in our new tech practice. We just started a new element of the business, a new business unit that'll be devoted specifically to consulting in the tech sphere. My job will be developing custom dashboards through sort of aggregating whoever's whoever we're working with, aggregating all of their data into one place so that they can monitor it, keeping subscription dashboards, things like that, and presenting and communicating the findings. So that's what I'm doing now. And I'm super excited to start this new position. And it's specifically within the construction industry. So it's a very, very interesting place to be because the construction industry is traditionally super behind. And so they're just now discovering a lot of this machine learning and artificial intelligence stuff that a lot of other industries have been doing for a while. So in one sense, that makes it really great for me because, like I mentioned, I've only been programming for a year and a half at this point. So my ability to implement a lot of those higher level, machine learning algorithms and models I'm still learning a lot. So it's giving me the opportunity to basically continue to learn within a sandbox environment while these people are kind of discovering what's going to be useful to them and what isn't. And I've kind of been able to take on an advisory role in that sense too, to sort of let them know hey, we need to invest in some machine learning stuff because it's going to be the future. So that's been really cool. And I'm super excited to see where that takes me.
Yeah, I definitely agree that whole kind of industry as a whole, construction, water management, sewer management, they're definitely behind in a lot of aspects. A lot of the municipalities and the towns that we work with, they still require physical deliverables. So you can't even email them a PDF. I have to essentially kill 80 trees and print out a 400-page report and mail it to them. And it's just, it's insane.
So I just started working for this company back in September. And prior to that, I was working at a market research firm within the radio industry. which was totally different. That was something really interesting that I can talk about more in a second too, if you want to hear about it. But
yeah, definitely.
But within the construction industry, it's been interesting to come into like a new job for me where I felt like I was stepping back several decades in terms of what the technology is that's used, like in a lot of ways, I literally like seem like a magician to these people because recently somebody asked me if there was a way. They were like, wow, I really wish that there was a way to go through all of this open text fields that we have from this survey that we do without having to have a human look at it. And I was like, there is a way to do that. It's called natural language processing. They were like, they thought that I was a wizard because I knew how to solve a problem that they had been confronted with for like years and never knew how to solve, just because they didn't really have anybody who had ever been hired with the same skill set that I have. And so in a lot of ways, I feel like I'm helping to kind of like transform this company and progress us forward, simply because I'm aware of a lot of these things that other people don't really even know about. It's been interesting to have that experience where I feel kind of like a big fish in a small pond in terms of my knowledge and skill set, but I'm still very much, learning all of this stuff. And I have the ability to like kind of test and implement things and like try new things out and abandon things if they don't work. But everybody is all for it. They're like, yeah, do it. Do whatever you want to do because what you're doing is better than everything else already. So
yeah, and I feel like a lot of people too, like they assume like they'll look at a big city company and it's like, oh wow, like they just kind of assume everyone's so advanced and all the technology's top of the line. Like everyone seems to make a lot of parallels to like, oh, like your Google or your Facebook, and like everyone's like super progressive and everything's like super up there. But in actuality, there's probably 80% of the companies out there, at least in the US, for what I could attest to, is still very much kind of like in an old school way of thinking. Like, they've done something a certain way for so long. At least it sounds like in your case that they're very open, to trying new things. And I'm definitely not saying my job in particular either. They're not open to that. But I don't know. It just seems like in a lot of ways, people seem to overlook the smaller kind of businesses that are still around and, still thriving in their own right. But they're definitely more technologically backward than a lot of people would assume, in 2018.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I heard some statistic recently talking about how data strategy adoption, like moving forward, is like within the next 10 years, if companies don't adopt a data strategy of some kind, that like roughly 60% of them will end up being left behind because of the current like statistics on who uses what and what the tech adoption has been. There are a ton of companies that just don't know how to move into the future. And that's part of what the job that I was just offered is designed to, mitigate, because I'm supposed to be helping people like that to like adopt new technology to help them move into the future. But it'll be interesting to see what happens as a lot of those like baby boomers retire. And you get the younger generation of people who are the ones that are very tech minded and have, they are positive towards tech adoption. Mm-hmm. It'll be interesting to see like once the baby boomers retire and those people, the younger people are in charge, like how the business sort of scape will change. It's going to be necessary to develop some kind of data strategy moving forward. Otherwise, I don't really know how you're going to keep up.
So I was doing some Instagram digging. And I saw a post that you made about a project you were working on that you ended up having to take a step back from and tackle another day. Do you feel like the Natalie from back when you first started learning all this, and even especially in the marketing days, would have made that same decision?
Probably not, honestly, because I have been a lot more challenged lately than I ever have been in the past, which is part of the reason why I have enjoyed pursuing this route so much, because I find myself to be consistently frustrated by things, which in my mind is a good indicator that you're learning. When you're frustrated by something, it means that you don't know how to do it well enough yet. And so, you're challenging yourself to be better at it the next time you do it. But probably back in the like marketing days, marketing Natalie might not have stepped back. I probably would have just powered through it and been frustrated the entire time. But I feel like now I've learned more about managing my time a lot better and knowing that taking breaks isn't necessarily a bad thing. And that sometimes you really need that break, that mental refresher in order to be able to come back and, know how to do it better. There have been so many times where like with programming, I've like sat in front of a problem for just hours, like not being able to figure out how to fix it. And then I'm like, all right, I'm done. And I go to bed. And while I'm falling asleep, I think of what the solution is. Or when I wake up, I've like dreamed a solution or something, and I have to go and try it. And a lot of the time it might not work necessarily, but it puts me closer to what I need to do. But yeah, it's super invaluable to have a fresh brain when you're tackling something that has been eluding you for days.
Do you feel that you've developed a lot of strategies and fallbacks for when things go haywire? Obviously, as you were saying, you're definitely attacking things from a much different viewpoint, being pressured more and getting more frustrated, which I agree, that definitely is a better sign of growth.
Usually I will go to the gym. I end up going and exercising because it completely resets my brain. I'm not thinking about anything when I'm exercising. It's like all I'm focusing on is obviously like how I'm moving. And that is, I've found, the best way for me to be completely refreshed to go and tackle a project again. I usually structure my day so that I'm at work until I have a normal shift, so it's 8:30 to 5:30. I usually take a break in the middle of the day to go home and eat lunch because I live right around the corner from the office. And then when I come back again, I work, that second half of the day. And that's usually where most of my problems arise, where I have, things that I need to tackle, that afternoon slump. And then at that point, once I get to a point where I realize that I'm like not really progressing any further in what I'm doing, that's when I'll leave and go to the gym. And that's usually around like 5 to 6 o'clock. And then I'm there for like roughly 2 hours. And then I come home. By that point, when I get home, I'm like, yes, I'm ready to work again. I'm like excited. On my way back, I've like thought of some solutions or something, and I can jump right into it. And my brain feels like it works again. So that's definitely, for me, been the best stress manager.
Do you kind of have a go-to that you end up going to at the gym, like a very similar routine? Or do you kind of walk in and be like, that machine looks free, I think I'll start with that, and just kind of, free form go with it?
I have a whole routine for the whole week that I have planned out usually, where I like lifting weights. That's my favorite kind of workout. I'm not a huge fan of cardio, although obviously you have to do it for heart health, right? And so I do. The stair stepper is my favorite cardio machine, and sprinting if I can find an open treadmill and I'm not afraid to sprint in front of everyone. I'll do like a warm up of some kind, usually, like I said, on the treadmill or the stair stepper for like 10, 20 minutes or so, just to get my heart rate up. And then I'll go and do whatever weight group I'm doing that day. So like on Monday, I do like legs, and then Tuesday is like back and biceps, and, so on and so forth throughout the week. Recently, actually, I've like kind of switched what kind of exercises I do. So my husband is like super into weightlifting, and I was kind of emulating his routine up until this point, obviously with just like lower weights. Recently, I've discovered that I really love doing like full body functional type exercises. So things like jump squats and burpees and like battle ropes and a lot of the stuff that's normally associated with CrossFit. But I don't like doing all of the like Olympic lifting because you can really, really hurt yourself doing that if you're not careful. But so I don't do any of that stuff, but I do, I love doing things like deadlifts and like I said, like sprints. And I'm lucky that my gym has a lot of the CrossFit style equipment, and you can use it without having to be part of like a CrossFit class. So there's like padded boxes you can do box jumps on and stuff like that, and like free weight barbells and things that you can load up with your own plates and everything. So I've been doing a lot of that stuff recently, and I love it.
I think we might have actually set some sort of Guinness Book of World Records. I think you're the first person on recording to ever say that they love doing burpees. I don't think I've ever met a single person in my life that's ever said, I love doing burpees. So kudos to you.
It's funny because I used to hate burpees. So I've always been like a fairly active person. Like I played sports in school and everything. And like, I was lucky because my parents took me hiking a lot when I was a kid. We did things like camping. I'm from California originally, actually, even though I live in North Carolina now. And, being from California, like very stereotypically, I used to surf as a kid and snowboard and all that stuff because I think you have to if you live in California. It's like a rite of passage.
Yeah.
But like, so I used to be super active as a kid. And then as I got older, once you're out of school, like there's not really a way to continue to play sports unless you're involved in like some of the like adult rec leagues. But I didn't really want to pay to be involved in adult rec leagues because they're like kind of expensive. And so that's when I was like, all right, well, I guess I'll start going to the gym. And so that was like, I don't know, a few years ago now. But when I started that whole journey of, new fitness of being at the gym, I didn't really know like what kind of exercises to do. And so I followed some workout guides. Almost all of them have you do burpees. And I think it was because I wasn't in as great of shape then as I am now. And so I hated them because they were like, they're so hard to do when you're like out of breath and you're sweaty and you're like, your heart's pumping really hard. But now I guess because I have better cardio, I think they're actually pretty fun. And so it's probably because it's easier to do now than it was before. It's why I think it's more fun. But I might be the first person ever, except for like if you listen to like some fitness podcasts, probably those people like burpees too. But
maybe we could safely say on this podcast, you'll be the only person that ends up loving burpees.
We'll see.
Imposter syndrome seems to affect everyone at some point in their career, whether in tech or otherwise. What are some of the ways you've managed to overcome those types of feelings, if you have at all? I'm kind of making an assumption.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I recently had someone say to me, they asked me what I do, and I told them that I'm a programmer, that I do data science, and she looked at me like she was just flabbergasted, and she was like, "You don't look like a programmer." And I was like, "What?" And I'm thinking to myself, it's really hard for me to keep my cool with those people because I'm like, "What does a
Yeah.
programmer look like? Please describe to me what you think a programmer looks like." Because part of me, when I hear that, unfortunately, the first thing I think of is, do I not seem smart enough to you to be a programmer? Like, is that
Right.
what the issue is here? And then, of course, like that right there is a great example of imposter syndrome because you're like immediately questioning your validity and your right to be there, you know?
Right.
And I ended up just explaining to her, like, I asked her, I was like, well, you know, what does a programmer look like? Because it looks like me. This is what one looks like, you know?
Right.
And I told her like more about what I do, and she seemed really impressed. And I hope that she left the conversation sort of having her perceptions challenged. That's ideal, right?
Right.
So that she doesn't ever say that to anyone else again, because that's kind of rude. But I work on a team of, I'm the only woman on my team of analytics people where I work, and so it's really interesting to see how a lot of the time they experience an issue of some kind. They tend to blame it on the technology that they're using. Like they'll come to some sort of problem with, like, Tableau is a great example. Tableau is an awesome set of software tools, but it's like super finicky and can be sort of volatile depending on how you're using it. If you're not optimized in your approach to using it, then it can be like, difficult to get it to work the way you want it to. But he was experiencing an issue with it, and he immediately was like, this sucks, this doesn't work, Tableau is stupid, it must be a bug, it's a glitch that they need to fix, I refuse to use it. But every time I've ever experienced an issue with like Tableau or whatever software I'm using, I think to myself, like, I just must not be using it the right way. Like, I must not be smart enough to know how to use this correctly. And I don't know if that's a byproduct of how you're taught as a kid to react to things. I don't know like what the psychology is behind that. It would be really interesting to find out. But I have found myself a couple of times like catching myself and being like, no, clearly this just means that something isn't working correctly for the software. It's not me. It's just been set up. And I go and I have found that the best way to combat that imposter syndrome is to go and figure out why it's not working, and then to prove to yourself that you can fix it. And once you fix it, you're like, cool, I'm smart enough to solve this problem. And then you feel like, all right, I belong here. It can definitely be difficult to be surrounded by people who very clearly like look at you and wonder why you're there. They're like, who is this person? And should she be here? Does she actually know what she's talking about? And I don't know, I tend to just like approach those people as a challenge. And I think to myself, like, I'll prove to them that I belong here. And, one conversation later, I've changed their mind. So I don't know. I think that confidence is a big part of it, and that you just have to believe in yourself, as cheesy as that sounds, that once you talk to somebody, you can prove them wrong, and that all you really need is a conversation for that to happen. So I don't know. I guess I've been approaching that problem mostly just by trying to talk to people and change their opinion directly so that I don't experience any of that moving forward.
I think that's definitely a good way to kind of attack it as well, thinking it is kind of more of a mountain to climb versus a hole to fall into.
Definitely. I feel lucky because I feel like it hasn't happened to me as often as it seems to happen to some other women that I know and follow. I don't get a ton of people that like directly come up to me and are rude like that. I don't know if it's because I'm not in like California, I'm not in like Silicon Valley. So maybe it's that I'm not around other people who have those perceptions already and are already going to be biased towards me. But it is definitely interesting I always have to wonder to myself, like, when I do something pretty cool that's great for the company and everybody's impressed by it, like, I have to wonder, like, how much of your reaction is because you didn't expect a woman to do it versus that it's cool and you're actually really excited about the solution. And it's impossible. Like, that's the kind of question that I have to just tell myself, like, you can't, that's a rabbit hole that's never ending. You can't wonder those kinds of things because there's no way to know. Like, there's no way to quantify that answer. So I just have to assume, like, that it is based off of my own merit and that they're actually really excited about the solution, and that as I continue to provide more awesome solutions, that it will be less and less of a surprise. I'm lucky, I think, that it hasn't happened to me as often as it has to others, but it's definitely like a perception, like widespread. I think that it unfortunately does happen to a lot of people, and hopefully that will change moving forward. I'm just fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed here too. I've heard a quote that I kind of always keep in my mind, and again, as a guy that works in tech, my opinions on this is definitely kind of different than yours or someone else's who could identify themselves differently, could feel. But I've kind of always been of the mindset of there's two ways to build the highest skyscraper in a city. You could either build your skyscraper, the tallest it could be, or tear down everyone else's around you so you're the only skyscraper.
Yeah.
Just try to put yourself above that kind of level of thinking. And like you said, it's just so easy to kind of have that kind of a mindset, everyone's talking down to me, everyone is, my ideas aren't as valid as something else, because of who I am, not because of what I've done.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. I really like that skyscraper analogy. I think that's really cool because it's like it focuses on the idea of challenging each other instead of tearing each other down. And it's sort of, like, why would you have the incentive to build a taller skyscraper unless somebody came before you and built the current tallest one, right?
Right.
So it's like, you have something to build on and to build on top of. And I mean, I find, like I said, for myself, and this might not be the correct approach for everybody. I don't want to speak for anybody, but for me, like the best way I have been able to combat it is to just simply try my hardest not to think of it in those terms. That because the more you compartmentalize your brain to start seeing and thinking about those differences and having them in mind, the more it becomes a reality that those differences exist. You're actually creating them. You're manifesting them by wondering if they exist in the first place. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? And it's like the best way to combat them is to try to make them not exist in the first place. And, you're definitely going to encounter some people who don't have the right mindset, like the person who asked me or told me, you don't look like a programmer. You're definitely always going to encounter people like that. But I think that the best way to silence those people, or at least not even silence them, because I don't think that that's productive either, but to just change their mind. Like the best way to change their mind is to not directly respond with something verbal, but just to show them what you can do. Like let your actions and your work speak for themselves rather. And that's the best way to challenge a bad mindset, is to prove to them why they're wrong, because that's hard evidence. At that point you can't argue, unless you just want to be a terrible person about it, in which case in which case I don't want to be involved with you anyway. You can stay in the past. I'm going to move forward and be with people who actually believe in me and want me to continue to succeed.
As some people might know, you're a huge fan of the Mass Effect video game series, and it actually ended up inspiring you to start your whole programming journey. Do you have the feeling that having a why is arguably even more important than a how?
Yeah, I would say that it's funny because I'm actually wearing my Mass Effect N7 hoodie right now. So that's super, super relevant. But yeah, I mean, having a why is the most, in my opinion, to me personally, it's the most important thing, because if you don't have a reason to do what you're doing, then there's no point. I mean, if you are one of those people who, I guess it depends on what's informing your sort of idea of success, right? But if you're one of those people who all you want is money and you don't care how you get it or why you get it, then what you're doing isn't terribly important to you, right? But for somebody like me, especially, I need to, throughout my entire life, I have always needed to answer the question why to be able to justify doing anything. If you can't explain to me, or if I can't explain to myself why something is important or why it's necessary, then I'm not going to waste my time doing it because I don't see a reason to. But for me, having that why drive everything that I do is super important, because I can always reach back as a form of inspiration, because there's always some kind of foundation for me to build off of. I don't ever question why I'm doing this. I don't ever find myself asking myself man, why am I doing what I'm doing? I'm breaking my back all the time. I'm staying up late every night to learn. I'm doing 4,000 different things at once to make myself better. I never ever find myself asking why, because it's inherent. I feel that purpose, and I don't need to remind myself, because it is what it is. That's the path that I have set myself upon. And that's, how I get there. To go back to your original question, you just got to figure it out. Once you know your why, I think that figuring out your how isn't as hard, because you sort of just that it'll happen somehow as long as you work hard enough. It's interesting because a lot of people ask me kind of questions about how I ended up in data science and what they can do to start learning data science and stuff like that. And I always want to tell them, there have been several people who have asked me, they have directly said, like, data science sounds like it's so cool. How do I start doing it? And I usually end up responding to those people with something along the lines of, you should learn Python and you should look into, XYZ and see if you like SQL. Do you like database management or do you like data visualization? Like, break it down in terms of what the different elements of data science are. But the one thing that I always want to tell them is like, all right, so it sounds cool to you, but do you have a reason why you think it's cool other than just like what you've heard from somebody else? Or are you actually interested in doing it for a different reason? Because, like recently, data science, I think it was last year, or maybe it was the year before that. It may have been both years, actually. That data science was named like the #1 sexiest job in America or the world or something by like, I think it was Glassdoor. I think that's hilarious because that's such a strange word to use to describe data science. But when you're like, I certainly do not feel sexy when I'm sitting at my computer at 4 o'clock in the morning in front of a program. But whatever. I guess it helps the brand. But like, I don't know. I just have to wonder for those people, like, is that the reason why you're doing it? Because if so, then you are going to burn out and fail immediately. Because if you don't have a reason why you're attacking it, then there's no inspiration for you to continue. There's no incentive for you to work that hard, because it's a lot of work. There's a lot to learn and it's changing so quickly. It's such a fast moving industry. There's new developments every single day. I am devoting my time specifically to learning Python for use within, machine learning model building. Like that's my desired area of interest as artificial intelligence engineering. And that's an area that like there have already been like decades of development devoted to that. And I'm trying to learn it all within like a couple of months. That's like so difficult. And so I guess my point is that like, if you think it's sexy and that's the only reason why you want to learn it, like that's the wrong reason to get involved. You need to find a different motivator than that, just for your own success. Otherwise, you're probably not going to last for very long.
Yeah, I definitely say that's the wrong why to have if you're getting into a job because it's sexy. Because guess what? In less than 2 years, Glassdoor is going to come out with another email blast saying, hey, X is the new sexiest job now. Go here instead. So
right.
You don't want to be stuck at the last
changing your career every 2 years,
Right, yeah. You don't want to be stuck at 2016 sexiest job because that's going to look bad.
Right. If that's your reason, then yeah, exactly. I think when those people come to me to ask me that question, I feel like the question that they are actually asking is like, what should I do with my life? Like, where do I go? And that's really like, only you can answer that question. Like I was lucky, you mentioned before, to have found my inspiration through Mass Effect because I am just like a massive lover of everything related to space. I love the idea of space exploration. And it just so happened that like all of the characters that are within the Mass Effect series and everything like really inspired me to like actually pursue that in real life. I was like, there's no reason why I can't do this for real. And so, I mean, like that's kind of what inspired me. And it just so happens that like I can always continuously come back to that as a source of inspiration. And, it's also really lucky for me that we are literally in probably what will be looked back on as like the golden age of space exploration. For like, we had the moon landing and everything back, in like the 60s and all that. But like a lot of that was predicated on the whole, like Cold War stuff that was going on and like that rivalry that was happening at the time. But now I feel like a lot of what's happening is like good old fashioned competition where it's just like for the sake of exploration and for the sake of just like science, which is super cool to me. And this relates surprisingly well to the conversation about like why versus how and everything that like, I think our why right now is just for the sake of advancing humanity, which I think is like an excellent goal. And I think that is the most profound goal to, be using as your motivation for exploring space and mining asteroids and putting people on the moon and creating habitation on Mars and stuff like that. And it's super awesome. I'm like so stoked that I'm alive during this period in time because that is eventually the sector that I want to work in, is to move into something related to like space tech and to be doing programming for that sector. But it's definitely a great time for somebody like me to be alive because it's like Mass Effect in real life, super excited by that.
Could you please describe the first 90 minutes of your day being specific as possible? So, for instance, if you wake up early, what time do you wake up? If you drink coffee, what kind do you drink? So on and so forth.
I wake up at 7:30 every day. And I generally at that point, I get up, I don't drink any coffee or eat any food before noon. because I do what's called intermittent fasting, where I only eat for 8 hours of the day. And then for the next 16 hours, I don't eat anything. It's supposed to be, just not to go off on too much of a tangent, but it's supposed to be really great for your metabolism and for your pancreas and your whole insulin producing system. It's supposed to sort of increase your insulin sensitivity so that you don't end up with pre-diabetic symptoms. Not that I am pre-diabetic, but right. I don't want to be. So, I do the intermittent fasting, but so I don't eat, or I drink water and I drink green tea. So I get up at 7:30 and I get ready. It takes me like 45 minutes to get ready. And then I leave for work and I'm at work by 8:30. And then I generally around 9 o'clock, I have 2 glasses of green tea, at some point 2 mugs of green tea. And I start whatever project I'm working on. And that's usually what the first like hour and a half of my day looks like. And then, like I said, I eat at noon. I eat breakfast, quote unquote, at noon. And then most of my activity happens, I'm a night person, not a morning person. And so most of my activity happens at the end of the day. I only usually get up extra early when I have work to do that I have like missed on, or if I have like homework that I'm doing that I need to catch up on or something like that. Generally, I would rather stay up the entire night than to go to bed and have to wake up early. It's just easier for me that way on that end.
Yeah, I'm definitely a morning person now myself, as I've explained before. I get up at 5. I try to meditate when it happens in a perfect world. And
I would really like to transform myself to be a morning person, because I really like the idea of starting the day earlier. I think that it is, I would be hungry for a lot longer.
Yeah, that's true.
I don't eat until noon. But I like the idea of starting the day earlier, because that would give me a chance to do more work on the front end before I get to work, instead of doing it all on the back end after I get home. But that's why I go to the gym after work, to kind of reset, to be able to do that work when I get home again anyway. Usually I try to get myself to go to sleep by like 11:30 or midnight, so that I get like a solid 8 hours of sleep. That doesn't always work out, but I try at least 7 or 8.
What's something that people might not necessarily know that you're obsessed with?
I definitely like constantly feel the travel bug and the itch to go someplace new. That probably falls under the category of an obsession if I'm like literally feeling a longing for it.
What's been your favorite, continent or place that you've ended up going to?
Probably far and away my favorite place that I've been was Tibet.
Really?
It was, yeah, I was really lucky enough to be able to go there before they like completely shut down the border travel between China and Tibet, because China has kind of absorbed Tibet. They refer to it as part of China instead of as its own sovereign nation. I got to be there for a week back in like 2007, I think is when it was. So it's been a while now, but yeah, like 11 years. That's crazy. But it was really cool. I loved going there just because it was such a totally different experience. And Tibet doesn't get a ton of tourists. So they're not like focused on the tourism aspect of like, people traveling to their country, which like a lot of the time when you go somewhere, you end up getting like the tourist experience and not really like a legitimate experience of the culture and the country itself. But because Tibet is like doesn't get that many people, they don't have that like weird tourism facade that they show you. You get to see like exactly who they are, and you get to experience their culture like exactly as they live it, which is like super authentic and interesting. And they're really cool people. And it's like, it's also very interesting to be like almost up in the Himalayas. You're like right on the border of it. So you're at a much higher elevation, and the sun is super intense, but it's like cold because there's snow everywhere, but it's like super sunny and hot, and you can get sunburned super easily. So you wear like hats and long sleeve shirts and stuff, even though it's like hot, but there's snow. It's such an interesting juxtaposition.
Yeah.
But it was really cool to get to go there because, like I said, shortly after we left, I went with my mom and my stepdad, and shortly after we left, they closed the border to like foreigners. Like you can't go from that direction at all anymore. We got to go to the Palace of the Dalai Lama, which was really cool. And we got to see a religious festival happening at a monastery. So we didn't know it was going to be happening, but we went up to this monastery up in the mountains. There were a bunch of prayer flags strung everywhere. And there were all these monks that were like chanting, and like they have these prayer wheels that like make this clicking sound. And so there was this like, it was insanely loud, and they were like dancing around and chanting, and they had like these cool ornate masks that they were wearing, and they were all in their saffron robes. And it was just like such a cool, like authentic, almost unreal feeling experience. And they didn't mind that we were there, I guess, because like they don't see white people a lot.
Yeah.
And so they were probably like, yeah, cool. Come see what we do. Like come witness our religious festival and our culture. And it was really neat. And I got to witness them like debate with each other. And I even got to go and like have tea with some monks in their temple, and they don't speak English. And so there was like a complete language barrier because I don't speak Tibetan. And, they served us yak butter tea, which is, I don't want to say it's gross because I was very honored by the experience, but it's disgusting. I would never drink yak butter tea again. It tastes like if you would imagine just putting a chunk of salty butter in a cup and pouring hot water over it. Like that's literally what yak butter tea is. But it's yak butter, which is awesome. I had never had yak before, so was kind of cool. But I got to sit there and drink tea with this like monk on pillows on the floor while he other monks like meditated nearby. So like that was definitely like the most vivid and interesting travel experience that I've had. While we were there, actually, our passports got stolen.
Oh no.
Which was wild because we ended up getting stuck there for a couple of extra days because our tour guide, because passports are hard to come by in Tibet because the Chinese government doesn't really allow Tibetans to move freely because of what happened with the Dalai Lama and him escaping into Nepal.
Right.
They don't allow free travel of Tibetans and they patrol the borders really, really heavily. And so whenever some unsuspecting foreigners come in with legitimate passports, we were warned that they might get stolen and to keep them close to us, but we hired a travel guide, at least for the first part of our trip there. And we kind of trusted him because he was really highly rated. And I mean, we don't know for sure that this is what happened, but he was the only person that would have had access to our passports. And he swiped them at some point and sold them. He denied completely. He was like, I never took your passports, you guys must have lost them, you irresponsible foreigners, And we were stuck in the country for a couple of extra days talking to the Chinese embassy that was on that side of the border, on the Tibetan side, at their local airport, trying to convince them to let us cross. And eventually we just had to bribe them and give them a bunch of money. And they let us cross right over the border to the American embassy that was on the other side. And we were able to get issued new passports while we were there. So fun fact about me, for 5 years, I had a Chinese passport because it was reissued in China.
That sounds like some locked up abroad type thing you would hear.
It was kind of terrifying because, Chinese military, they're all armed with lots of guns, lots of munitions everywhere. And so you're standing there arguing with a Chinese official about the fact that you are a foreigner that has, in their eyes, just lost their passport. And then, of course, they're also looking at us we have enabled a couple of Tibetans to escape.
Right.
And so they're not looking at us very favorably because we brought an opportunity into their country that they weren't really excited about us coming in there to begin with. Yeah. And now we've left a couple of Tibetans with some passports that they can probably replicate. And there were 3 of us. And so that's a pretty good number to go off of. We ended up having to just pay them pretty handsomely to escape, essentially. And once we were back in China, it was fine. But man, it was a little touch and go for a little while there.
If you could get a billboard and have anything you'd want written on it, what would it say and why?
Probably relating to the conversation we had earlier about people drawing a lot of perceptions off of appearance and, looking at me and saying, you don't look like a programmer. I think I would probably want a billboard that shows I think this concept has been done before where there's a couple of skeletons, 6 or 7 skeletons that look exactly the same. Mm-hmm. You can't tell gender or skin color or nationality or whatever. And I would have them all across in a line reading different professions and different religions maybe, or different genders, something that shows anybody can be whatever they want to be. And we're all exactly the same, and that you shouldn't judge based off of appearance to, whatever perceptions you have shouldn't inform what you think a person is going to be in your eyes.
So just kind of in wrapping up, where people can find you, where are you active on the internet?
Yeah, so I'm definitely most active on Instagram. I have a Twitter as well, but I don't use it as much just because I don't really ever know what to post on Twitter, since it seems like a really limited format to me. And so I don't use it a whole lot. But both Instagram and Twitter, my handle is _INIT_Nat. It's a joke about Python because in Python, when you initialize a new class, that's the command that you use. Feel free to follow me on either Twitter or Instagram. You'll get a lot more content on Instagram than you will on Twitter. I will answer DMs and comments on there. And also feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn if you want to. Just send me a note ahead of time about where you heard about me or why you know who I am, just so I know how to, why to accept you as a friend or connection. But my name on there is just Natalie Spare. And you should be able to find me using Natalie Spare and the fact that my title is data scientist. So
if you have one question to the audience that they could answer in, future comments or posts, what would you ask them?
I would want them to retrospectively look internally and ask themselves why they're doing what they're doing. and to give a good answer for exactly why you're on the path that you're on, and challenge them to reevaluate if they can't answer that question.
If you made it this far, thank you for listening to Small Talk Tech. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and over at smalltalktech.com. If you like what you've heard, the best way to help us out early on is to leave us a review on iTunes. Finally, if you have any questions or comments, you can send them directly to matt@smalltalktech.com. That's MAT@smalltalktech.com. Thanks again.